Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Today, we're joined by Andy Turner, who's the CEO of Turner Financial. So welcome to the podcast, Andy. Why don't
Thank
we
you,
start with
Jeff.
you?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Pleasure to have this. Yeah. Why don't we start with you telling the folks a little bit about yourself and what you guys are doing over at Turner Financial?
I have been in the business officially since 1999. That's when I got my insurance license and started to get into financial planning, insurance planning, as far as life insurance, things like that. But I was answering phones for about 5 years prior to that for my brother. He's retired now, so I'm allowed to say that. He didn't like me talking about it before. I was one of those lucky folks that got my deep voice early. And so I could get on the phone with either his clients, or at the time we were recruiting advisors and agents across the United States. And my job was to get the contract and then fax it in. And for some of you young cats that are on here, you might not have ever seen a fax, but I used to have to set at 6 o'clock at night, feed it. And so I've seen where the revolution of my business and our space in the financial sector, where it kind of came in the early, late 90s to where we are now, technology wise, product wise, where things fit, where they don't. Personal side of my business with Turner Financial, I'm really fond of doing a lot of income planning and trying to help protect people's retirement. It's kind of where I hang my hat. And then on the other side of that, I have a lot of advisors across the United States, and I'm in the process of merging that side of my business with Peak Pro Financial out of Denver, Colorado. Was the right symmetry and the right thing to do to give my current advisors a lot more access to marketing and more product than what I had access to. And so it's been a great merger. We just started working on that at the beginning of November. I would say we're about 60, 70% there. It's always a process getting contracts moved, and, it's never next day type of thing, but it'll be the right thing. And obviously for anybody else that I talk to new, I would love to get into the conversation of why I made the move, because it took me about a year and a half to make that decision.
Okay. So
Correct.
if someone doesn't know you, or, it would be your ideal customer, like how do they self-identify? Like if someone doesn't know you yet, again, maybe another way to reintroduce yourself is, so for the listener who says, you know what, I do need to call Andy because Andy can solve the problem that I have, or is the right person for my retirement. How do you see yourself and differentiate yourself? And, feel free to take this any direction you want.
I would say anybody that's above 30 should start thinking about what their retirement's going to look at or look like. It's a different conversation between someone that's 30 and it's someone that's 60, where I really 60 to 70, maybe even 80% of my clients, I've never went back and added it up, but I'd probably say it's probably 80% of my clientele fit that mold of 55 and older, where they have accumulated some wealth. They are now looking at, I'm going to retire in 5 years. I'm going to retire in 10 years. I'm going to retire in 15 years. What do I need to do to start ratcheting my decisions to protect my nest egg that I have built up? Because there's a difference between your accumulation phase. As you're young, you can be more aggressive in the market and kind of ride the highs and survive the lows, so to speak. But also, where do I start putting some other protected types products? When do those start to fit? Turning your 401k into your own pension. What does that look like? What's the taxation look like? There's a lot of conversation to be had at that point. And the earlier you can have it, the better. Obviously, most of the time, it's about 5 years. It seems like right about 4 or 5 years before someone gets ready to retire is when they get that hot button of the, like, we need to have a conversation. It better if you can have it earlier. And I know it's not fun, and no one ever wants to talk about, the future, especially from a mortality standpoint, if it's a life insurance and things like that. But the earlier you plan and the more times that you ask those questions early, it'll just become easier down the road when that time comes and you pull that lever, so to speak, that, hey, I'm retiring in January, but I've got all these systems in place and products in place. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I never tell anybody you should be 100% in anything. You should never be 100% in the market. And take those gains and protect them, and then let that money that you used still stay in the market and grow. But you don't necessarily want to be 100% in the market when you're 65 years old, because 08, 09 happens, that's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt really bad. And so, those are kind of what my unique, or I wouldn't say unique, but my clientele kind of fit that mold of deciding, okay, it's time to start changing some of my focus away from just accumulating my retirement dollars and looking at what it's going to look like we're going to use them.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned '08, and if, we could talk about the dot-com bubble and the turn of the century, we could talk about '08, '09, great financial crisis, and even the COVID K-shaped recovery. What are some of the biggest, I don't know, customer stories or Did you have clients where you helped them out during any of these periods that stand out?
I have some that I helped out. I'll do 2. I'll do the bad one first, and then people remember the good one second. I have a good friend of mine whose father was a truck driver for Ford
Mhm.
and retired right at the end of '07, going into January of '08. Anybody listening that survived that's going to know where this is going. Had a very large 401k with them, had reached out to me, and he had mentioned to me about a year prior, hey, maybe I need to protect a little bit of this. I've been, realizing that I'm all in the market. Had just turned 67 at the time, but he had his first grandchild on its way with his daughter. This was her first grandchild, and he wanted to help her with the grandchild. So he went down to Alabama. We live in Indiana, and said, when I get back, let's have a conversation about moving some of this money, because he had some other money saved. So it's not like he had to move that money that day. But I had told him, I said, you're all in the market. Maybe you should move some of that into protected funds in the 401k. I'd never looked at it, so I can't say what he had it in, but I know it was aggressive. And we all know what happened a few months later. We had the crash, and his portfolio took about a 44% hit. And so he went from $790,000 to losing more than almost half of that in about 3 weeks, not knowing it. He hadn't checked other than reading about it. And then he finally was able to log in where he was at. And then he's calling me, what do I do? What do I do? And unfortunately for him, what he had planned on doing for retirement, using those dollars to live off of, he had to get a part-time job and started mowing lawn and doing some other things, fixing mowers, had some side jobs to offset the fact that he had to ride the market back. Because what people don't realize, when you have a 20%, 30%, 40% drop in the market, it never comes back that fast. It's going to come back 3, it's going to come back 11. You're going to have a really good year in that 11, but you're still not to even. And then you've got to turn around and maybe have a 6. Most people that got hit in '08, '09 didn't really break even until 215, 216. Even if they turned around and said, you know what, I'm pushing my chips in, I'm going to ride the high, it's going to come back. Still takes that amount of time. That's just sequence of returns. You've taken a loss, you got to get back to even before you're back to gaining dollars. And for someone that's in that time zone of getting ready to retire, that hurts, because now you don't have as much cash to retire on, especially if you're planning on doing a drawdown to some type of product where you can take lifetime income. And so that was a tough one because that was personal. I have a good one where during COVID, I had a gentleman decide to retire early. COVID freaked him out a little bit, and he had some issues with the company he was with about being forced to come in and get COVID shots. And he had had issues with the flu shot in the past and was not really keen on just jumping into taking something that he could have a response to. His brother had an issue with it and had some problems from the COVID shot that he took. And so we ended up moving money, and he was able to retire and has been retired for the past 5 years off of the money that he had. Now we had to adjust it. His lifestyle changed a little on what he had planned on getting, because he had planned on retiring about now, 2025, 2026. But because we had pulled some levers and put him in some products that made sense, he was able to protect his retirement. And even with the market shooting up, he didn't want to take any chances, because obviously we dropped and then it came back from the stimulus package, but he didn't want to take any of those chances. And so, I've had cash value life insurance clients that call me, for instance, had one that was 75 years old, or he's getting ready to turn 75, wanted to take his grandsons and his sons boating. And I'm talking like be on a boat for like 4 or 5 days boating, not one 4-hour excursion. It was going to cost about $40,000 to do it. And he was going to pull it out of his retirement accounts. And I said, you realize that you've got a couple $100,000 of cash value in your, universal, IUL, which is Index Universal Life, that I sold him a long time ago. He's one of my first clients in 1999. And we had overfunded it a little bit and upped it and let it ride, in the S&P 500. And it did what it was supposed to do. And it grew. And he used that money, ended up pulling out about 70K, because then he took his wife to Greece. He did 2 trips, but had that money that was tax free at that point. And so when you get those opportunities to sit down with the right planner, whether it's me or someone else, if you do it at the right time and know that down the road, those things are going to happen to you. I know it's really hard. Someone that's 30 or 40 right now, like, I don't think I have to worry about that. You will. It'll come. And then when you get to be 60 plus, 65, 70, you're going to have situations where, like, how do I use my retirement and also not kill myself tax wise? And so there's a lot of planning that has to take place.
Thank you for sharing both stories, which are, one is sad, right? And it's kind of like, what's the worst that could happen? Because it
Yep.
happens, right? So that's sobering and real. And then there's yeah, like someone who's successfully landed the plane, but also got to enjoy life experiences,
Right.
with a tax strategy where it's not, punitive or whatever. Like the taxes didn't burden them more than they had to. It's
Right. That's the hardest thing going into retirement. I think that people don't realize is that if you have a lot of your money, most people don't realize they only hear the acronym 401k. So 401k is basically just a company IRA is all it is. And when you go to move it, you either change companies and you move it to another K, or you've decided to retire and it's now time to either take that money as a lump sum, which I would not recommend because you're not going to like that tax bill, to being able to turn around and move it into what's called a traditional IRA and being in control of it at that point. But all of those dollars, when you decide to use them after you're 59 and a half, are taxable because you've been getting it tax free at that point. That money's been growing with interest, whether it's in a 401k or an IRA at that point, tax free. The government's going to expect to get that money back. And so you have something that's called an RMD coming. It's required minimum distribution. And when you get to be 73, you're going to have to start taking some of that money out. And the higher your IRAs are, the bigger that bill's going to be. And if you've got other income coming in, Social Security, maybe you have a pension, which is not normal, but it sometimes happens because those are kind of going away. But wherever your income's coming from, if all of a sudden you got to tack on $70,000 a year that's not been taxed yet, all of a sudden that hurts. And we all know that I don't care where we're at in time, taxes don't go backwards. And so whatever you're looking at today, if you're thinking you're going to retire in 10 years, do you really think taxes are going to be less? No. And so if you're going to try to figure it out, you got to start figuring it out ahead of time on moving and adjusting and maybe being able to use products and different things to offset those taxes, what they call Roth conversions, Roth alternatives, because the sooner you can start taking advantage of those, we call it the RMD tsunami. Some people call it the silver tsunami. You're going to get hit with it. You know, if you've got money, $500,000 plus, $700,000 plus in 401ks or IRAs, you're going to have to start pulling on that money, even if you don't need it for income at the time. At some point, you're going to hit your RMDs. You can't avoid it.
there's the average age of retirement, but I'm curious in your experience, have you seen what's the low end? Like some people maybe that were successful quick and wrapped it up, but what's the age range you're seeing where, because again, you mentioned earlier, people don't want to talk about this, but the sooner you have checkups and visit the doctor and, talk in your 30s and 40s, build up to
Right.
it. But the actual like pulling the trigger, like retiring, have you seen people in their 40s or early 50s and like what's your kind of, age range that you're experiencing?
Most of what I'm seeing is that 55 to 60 range now, where it used to be more 60 to 65, where people are realizing, I really would like to get out earlier. I'd like to be done sooner.
Is that post
There was
pan
always
sorry to
before that
yeah,
59 and a half, and then being able to turn on your Social Security, where a lot of people now,
yeah.
especially your small business owners or people that have been able to be successful in owning their own business, they sell that business and they've got a chunk of cash. And now it's trying to figure out how to live off of it. I have seen and worked with a few that have been in their mid 40s where the same thing happened. They were just quicker at it. The hardest thing to do for any of them, and it doesn't matter where the age is, that you have this amount of dollars and now you got to live off of it. You've now switched from a W-2 employee, so to speak, or even a 1099 employee, or, a K-1 employee, however you're set up, based on how you're set up with your company if you own it. At some point, all of a sudden now you're like, oh, wait a minute, I just got given $5 million for my company. How am I using this? Or, I had one that got 55 million 2 years ago. We had to figure out how to manipulate that. So one, he didn't get killed tax wise. And you got to start talking about trusts and understanding that now you maybe have just tripled or quadrupled your wealth in the course of 60 days. And so there are a lot of levers that can be used. The trick is being ahead of it. That if you have the right conversations, like you said, being able to, you used an analogy a second ago. I actually use in a lot of my seminars. When you go and find out you have a brain tumor, are you going to go to your nurse practitioner or your regular doctor and have them do the surgery? No. You're going to
Right.
want to go find the best brain surgeon. If you're like me, I'm going to find the best one in the world. I don't care if it's the United States or not. Whoever's the top dog's the guy I want to talk to or gal. But the thought process on that is that why would you gamble your retirement? Why would you play roulette with your retirement? Why wouldn't you sit down and say, okay, I'm getting ready to sell my company. I'm getting XYZ dollars. What should I do with it? What are my options? And if someone only says one thing and they don't give you a couple of options, I would be concerned. You probably should interview three or four. And it's not just about what they know, it's also whether or not your personalities mesh. Because you're going to get to know them pretty well. They're going to know your finances. They're going to know what your goals are in retirement, what your so-called dream is, where do you want to get to? And sometimes they got to be a sounding board of reason. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to live on a mansion on a beach, but they don't make the money to be able to make that happen. Okay, let's throttle that back a little bit. Let's have a house on the beach. How do you get to there? And we'll find out what the size of the house is based on those increments. But you got to sometimes be that voice of reason also. And you got to have somebody that's gutsy enough to say, wait a minute, this is going to hurt a little bit, but you can't do that. We can get to B. I think we can get to the B done, but A is not going to work. And there's a lot of conversation that takes place in that. So personality matters too.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, yeah. Mixing metaphors, the doctor, all your chips at the table. This is the most important. I mean, if it's your, not to say that retiring is gambling, that's not the point. But the point being, all your chips is it's your entire net worth. Shouldn't you have the best brain surgeon, to mix another metaphor? But yeah, so like to get the
Yes.
best doctor. Question I had was, okay, we're in the big, it's February 2026. We're in the second half of the decade. And the first half of this decade, first 5 years, you had COVID. And so did you see a change in retirement and behavior? So like if folks could retire early, where they're just calling it quicker, so maybe like
I
skewing
saw a
younger
lot of that,
because of,
especially in
yeah,
certain industries. Yes,
yeah,
where the industries that were being really hard on your 60 to 65-year-olds that still wanted to work because they liked their job, but then
hmm,
COVID kind of flipped things upside down. I have a lot of being here in Indiana, I have a lot of Eli Lilly clients, and a
right,
lot of them were like, I'll deal with the pressure of this. I don't want to deal with what's going on with all of it, And then you had situations here recently. I've had some people retire because they're being forced now to come back in the office. They kind of got comfortable working from home. And now people are like, we don't feel like productivity is where it should be. Some are trying to do hybrid offices so that it softens the blow. But they'll turn around. My wife works for an insurance company. She's in property and casualty, and I won't say the name so we don't get in trouble. But
mm,
they've been forcing some of their offices. She's lucky here in Indiana because the office is closed. There's not one close. So she's remote regardless. But people that are close to an office, if they're within an hour drive, they're forcing them to come back to the office. And some of those people are retiring. They're like, you know what? Liked working from home, don't really want to deal with the commute anymore. So COVID has caused all kinds of things, even after, a lot of people, when you talk to them, they think 2020, 2021, but I'm seeing it monthly, where I'm talking to someone, it's like, now my company's doing this, I think I'm out, and so it's changed their mind. Maybe they're 62 and they didn't plan on retiring until 65. I had one that I just spoke to that was a new client that I'm bringing on board last week. She's 60, and she's like, I don't want to go back to the office. I don't want to do it. And so how do I make this work sooner than what we had planned? 'Cause she's been a client for a bit. How do I get now what I wanted to do at 65 or 67? Well, we got to throttle things back a little bit. Maybe those 3 vacations isn't going to work. We figure out that you can afford one, go on a good one, but you're not going to be able to just spend a lot of time abroad or whatever you want to do because you're not going to have the dollars to do so. So the conversations have changed with a lot. I'd say probably 30, 40%.
yeah. That's 30, 40%. Okay. Interesting. All right. My next question is forward looking, getting us to 2030. Do you think AI is truly disrupting? But the way I'm going to frame AI is every week, at least for me, I'm seeing like, oh, something was released that disrupts this industry. Da 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 da. Super productivity hack. It sounds great. So then the question is like, are you going to keep up and like as an adopter in your professional life, or does it really disrupt jobs? And does that trigger someone to say, you know what, the pace of AI or the job insecurity I have because of AI? I'm looking at the second half of this decade of, is AI going to be a driver? Yes, for productivity gains. Yes, for performance of companies and portfolios for sure. And, but on the flip side, is it one of these things where people say, you know what, I'm going to let the AI boom happen, but this is my reason to retire because I'm good. Like, just like, I had a good thing going. AI is changing things so much. Let the next generation pick it up. I'm going to retire now. And so I guess it's a kind of a two-edged question of I think AI could be the trend of the second half of this decade where maybe COVID instigated retirements and AI may instigate more retirements. And I'm just curious if you have like a point of view where like, the economic games of AI will help people's portfolios in retirement, but it's kind of the question of like, are people really going to like pick it up and benefit from it? Or is that like a young generation game and just let it go?
I can tell you, I've got two versions of that a little bit. So going back to COVID, in my industry, and and I work with a lot of advisors that do what I do. I act as their broker basically. I had to teach an awful lot of people how to really use FaceTime and Zoom because a lot of my advisors were over 60, and I wouldn't say they're technologically challenged. They just never had done it. And then all of a sudden, you're changing what they did from a face to face conversation to be able to have one of these conversations. And so I had a lot of agents retire. I had a lot of people that I worked with, good advisors, really good people, good for their clients that were like, "Hey, do you want to buy me out?" I mean, I absorbed a couple of books because of that. Where I took on their clients because I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I'll help out. I'll still make sure, we figured out a buy down for them, to make it work. So to fast forward to that to now, I'm not scared of it because there are certain things in my industry that AI can't do, like having this conversation. For instance, and I laugh about this, but because of my voice, to text hates me. I don't know what it is with my deep voice, but they doesn't like it. Whenever I pull in someplace that has changed to AI on their, you can tell that now. I will say in the last couple of months it's gotten better, but in the beginning it was very prompted, and if you said something kind of off the cuff or tried to be funny, it had no idea what you were saying. It would go back to the same question again. So there's going to be some industries like ours where there's still got to be some personal. Now that may change later as AI gets sharper and obviously the younger crowd's okay just sharing certain points to get to their retirement. But right now, I'd say for the next 15 years, which is fine with me, I'm protected. To answer your question completely, I think you're going to see in some other industries similar to what I saw in 2020 that some of this stuff is moving so fast that the people that are 45 and older, 50 and older are going to say, you know what? I don't wanna mess with that. I don't need to learn this. I don't wanna have to learn how to implement it. I don't wanna start from scratch because a lot of it, because it's moving so fast, you're having to learn it. Whatever you learn today may be obsolete in 60 days, which is crazy, but that's how fast it's moving. And so, I'm not scared of it because I love the fact that I can get done having a conversation with a client. I can plug in their retirement goals and what their ideas are, and Chat GBT will say, "Put this here," and I've got software, and the software and Chat GBT talk, and then boom, I have a whole portfolio built of what this is gonna look like in 5 years, 10 years, 15, and I don't even have to type it in anymore. I can just talk to it. That's awesome. But for some people, it scares them and they aren't going to be willing to test it. I've tested a virtual AI assistant. That's worked okay. Some of that prompting I'm still working on because having the conversation between a client and advisor is a little different on what they're asking and what they need. So yes, I would say your initial question, we are going to probably see another 20 to 30, maybe 40% of retirements get created, or not created, but come quicker because they're just going to say, you know what, I've got some money saved back. I can make it on this dollar, maybe get a part-time job doing something, that AI is not affecting, and move on down the road. Service, restaurant, something, whatever they want to do. I talked to a gentleman the other day. He's going to go work for a golf course and mow lawns. He's like, hey, they'll be able to mow some stuff, with automatic mowers, but there's some things it's never going to be able to do. Like, it's not going to be able to make it look this way. It's going to still need some hands-on, approach. And so he's like, I'm going to, use what income I have and move on a golf course, and I'll get free golf for working, and I'll have some income coming in. That's what I'm going to do. Oh, now I hope for him that that's exactly what happens, and he's fine. But yeah, ultimately, we're going to see some things happen in the next 4 to 5 years where people are pushed into retirement quicker. I believe that.
Yeah, a lot of things are happening exponentially, and
Mm.
it's
It's happening
hard.
so fast.
Yeah,
The speed of it. You take a look at the dot com, look at the late 90s, early 2000s when and we talked, you mentioned earlier about the dot com bubble. A lot of people got hurt during that and they had to come out of it because they were betting on those big gains. There were a lot of people making gains during that time period that were crazy. I think there's a similar situation happening with AI now that it's just moving so quick and there's so much unknown that some people are just going to be scared of it. For some folks, when they get really super comfortable in their position, to have it get rocky, they're not really one to go find a life raft. The life raft is going to be, I'm going into retirement.
Yeah. Yeah, the 5-year plan is a tricky one with exponential growth, and
Yes.
there's the guys that are vibe coding and doing this stuff, and others that are just like, let's let my portfolio benefit from the AI boom, but I'm going to step off. And I like the analogy of going into, or the story of going into the real world and just enjoying life, which is golfing and servicing restaurants. This has been a great conversation. I have to ask before we end,
Mhm.
the elephant in the background, dreams way more. What is this?
You see that? My daughter's bought me that. Dreams way more than excuses,
Then
and
exclusive.
it's a butterfly on the end pushing up an elephant.
Dreams way more than excuses. Beautiful. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have that on my bottom of my email signature. And a few years ago, when I moved into this office, I wanted to get some wall art. I had a little bit, but it was old. And my daughters found that and loved it. And they were like, they're like, Dad, that's your quote. Like that's on your email.
Yeah.
So, and I loved the picture because it's just, it is what it is. Excuses are excuses. If you want something to happen, you make it happen.
Yeah. No, well said. All right. Well, as we wrap up, where can people find you, Andy?
Yeah, so www.turnerfinancial.biz and then www.peakprofinancial.com if you're an advisor. If you want to reach me directly, you can call my office line, which is 317-204-6497. The email's Andy@turnerfinancial.biz. And if you Google Turner Financial, I'll pop up. So anybody has any questions, something I probably should say when I'm having some of these conversations, I am not a charge you fee for having a conversation with me. If you've got questions about your retirement, let's sit down and talk for 15-20 minutes. If we have a little bit of symmetry, we'll move, we'll go to that next level. And so I probably should share that more, that, I'll share whatever knowledge I have and hope I steer you in the right direction and hope that you become a client.
That sounds great. And we'll type this all up in the show notes too. So the links will all be available. Andy, thank you for sharing your time, your perspective, the stories, your real life experience. It's been a pleasure talking to you. So thanks so much.
No, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
All right. You too.